What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Patrick here, and moving on to the next question. We're told that 1/7 of a company's inventory was destroyed by fire, and that the remaining portion, which was partially damaged, was sold for 5/9 of its value at $10,000. Before the value, what was the value of number one, the entire inventory, and then number two, the portion destroyed by the fire? So to start this question off, what I'm going to do is show what's going on through a diagram just to give you a better visual sense. So let's say that this company had inventory over here. So this was the inventory before the fire, and then what happened was 1/7 of this inventory was destroyed. Right? 1/7 of this inventory was destroyed by the fire. And so what does that mean? How much was remaining of the original inventory? Well, that means that 6/7 was remaining. Right? If 1/7 was destroyed, that means 6/7 was still remaining. Right? 6/7 plus 1/7 gives us 1 or 100% of that original inventory. Now, what happened was this remaining portion, even though it was remaining, it was still partially damaged. And so it was sold for 5/9 of its value. So this portion here was sold for 5/9 of the original value before the fire. So sold for 5/9 for $10,000. Right? So what we can first do is we can find what was the value of this remaining portion here before the fire. Right? Because this portion here was sold for 5/9 of its value for $10,000. Okay, so basically, if we let's introduce a variable here. So what I'm going to do is this portion here, I'm going to let it be x. So x, to be more specific, x is equal to the value of the remaining inventory. So the 6/7 portion, the value of the remaining inventory before the fire. Right? So the value of the remaining inventory, this portion here, what was the value of that before the fire? And so what we can do is if we let this be x, that means that the value of this portion before the fire times 5/9 is equal, you receive 5/9 of this original value, and that was $10,000 that you received. And so if we want to solve for this x value here, a couple of different ways we can do it. We can just divide both sides by 5/9. We can also take this and combine it to be 5x/9, and then this would be 10,000/1. We could cross multiply. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this and divide both sides by 5/9, so we'd have 10,000. This is like over 1 divided by 5/9. That's what x is going to be, which is like 10,000 times 9/5 times the reciprocal of that. And then notice 5 goes into 10,000, 2,000 times 9 gives us 18,000. So that's what x is. So that's the value of this portion before the fire, right? So that's going to be 18,000. So, sorry, let's keep this here. So this portion here was worth 18,000. So you could kind of even think about these first two arrows in terms of the mass of the inventory. So let's say that the total inventory before the fire had a mass of, let's say, 70 kilograms. Right, so 1/7 of that, this 10 kilograms here, was destroyed, and then 60 kilograms was remaining. But this 60 kilograms was partially damaged. So if it wasn't partially damaged before the fire, this 60 kilograms would have been worth $18,000. But because it was slightly damaged, you only receive 5/9 of that value. 5/9 of 18,000 is $10,000. Right? So now that we have this right here, we can figure out these two things, because this 18,000, remember, it's the value of this portion before the fire, and they're asking before the fire what was the value of the entire inventory, this, and then what was the value of the portion destroyed by the fire, this, over here. Right? That's what they're asking for. And since we have this, we can just, we know 6/7. So if we take, what I'll do is let's introduce another variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let y, I'll write it over here, y is equal to the value of the entire inventory before the fire. So that's actually going to be the answer to number 1. So this here is y. So the value of the entire inventory, if we took that, the value of the entire inventory before the fire, well, 6/7 of that is worth 18,000. Right? Because this portion is 6/7 of this, and before the fire, this portion was worth 18,000. So the entire inventory times 6/7 is 18,000. So to solve for y, we can just divide both sides by 6/7. So 18,000 divided by 6/7 is the same as 18,000 times 7/6, the reciprocal. 6 goes into 18,000 3,000 times. 3,000 times 7 gives us 21,000. Right, another thing you could do, you could take the 18,000 multiplied by the 7 and then divide that number by the 6. You still get 21,000. So 21,000 is the value of the entire inventory before the fire. So that's actually the answer to number 1. And then the portion destroyed by the fire, what was the value of that portion before the fire? Well, what's 1/7 of 21,000? We could put another variable here. Actually, let's say z is equal to the value of the destroyed inventory before the fire, so the 1/7 portion. Well, what we could do is we could take the value of the entire inventory before the fire, multiply it by 1/7, and that's going to give us $3,000. So the answer to number 2 is 3,000. Anyway, I could have maybe explained that in a more efficient way, but I did want to include this diagram. So basically what happened, just in general, you had inventory. Let's say it was 70 kilograms worth of inventory. You could use any number here. I just used 70 because we're using 7 as a denominator, so then these numbers are going to be smooth. You could have used maybe 700 kilograms as well. But let's pretend it's 70 kilograms of inventory you had. That was worth $21,000. That was before the fire. And so 1/7 of that would be worth 3,000. 6/7 of that would be 18,000. right? So the fire came and destroyed this portion. And then this portion was still remaining, this 60 kilograms, but it wasn't worth 18,000 anymore. Now you sold it for 5/9 of that value and received $10,000. So then we went backwards, figured out this, then from this we figured out that. That was the answer to number 1, and then that's the answer to number 2. Right, so just a bunch of algebra. It's more so just understanding what's going on with the question. The algebra isn't too bad. Once you understand, then it's just basically simple algebra dealing with fractions.